The day Rowan Hale saw Maribel cruise again, the sun was high and unforgiving, bleaching the city in sharp light, and the past hit him like a sudden shadow with nowhere to hide. 7 years ago she had walked out of his life and left him hollowed out, carrying secrets that shattered what he believed was unbreakable. He had learned to live with the ache, to stitch himself back together in quiet, ordinary ways, never imagining that in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, fate would twist hard enough to bring her back not as a memory, but as a life slipping away in front of him. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of compassion, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Journal, because stories like this remind us that even broken things can still save lives. Rowan had rebuilt his world carefully, brick by brick, in the bright routines of daytime work and simple evenings. After Maribel left, he had stopped trusting grand promises and focused on small certainties, like the way morning light spilled across his drafting table at the community architecture office, or how the smell of coffee grounded him before meetings. He was no longer the man who planned futures with someone else in mind. He had become someone who planned buildings meant to shelter others, spaces that felt safe and honest, because honesty had once been stolen from him. The betrayal had not been loud, it had been slow and devastating, a truth revealed too late, followed by her leaving without looking back. For a long time, Rowan carried the humiliation and the grief like stones in his pockets, learning how to walk without drowning. Maribel, in those same 7 years, had lived a life that looked successful from a distance. She chased ambitions with the same intensity she once brought into Rowan's life, believing motion could outrun regret. Yet regret is patient, and it waits. The choices she made after leaving him were complicated and heavy, filled with compromises she told herself were necessary. By the time she realized how deeply she had wounded someone who loved her without conditions, the distance between them felt too wide to cross. She convinced herself that Rowan had moved on and was better off without her shadow crossing his path again. She never imagined the day would come when she would need him not for forgiveness, but for survival. The afternoon everything changed was bright and bustling. Rowan had stepped out during lunch to walk through the city plaza, enjoying the warmth and the hum of people moving with purpose. He liked daytime because it felt honest, nothing hidden, nothing disguised by darkness. That was when he noticed the commotion near the fountain, a small crowd forming, the air thick with alarm. Someone had collapsed. Rowan felt the old instinct rise in him, the one that made him move toward trouble instead of away. As he pushed closer, the sight of Maribel on the ground shattered the careful balance he had built. Her face was pale, her body unnaturally still against the bright stone, and for a split second, 7 years disappeared as fear roared through him. Time slowed into sharp, painful fragments. Rowan's mind raced, pulling from memories of first aid training he had once taken for a volunteer project, knowledge he never expected to need again. He knelt beside her, ignoring the way his hands trembled, focusing on what mattered in that moment. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the unanswered questions all fell away under the weight of the present. Around them, the city continued breathing, sunlight glinting off glass and water, unaware that a life teetered on the edge. As Rowan worked to keep her stable until help arrived, memories intruded uninvited. He remembered the early days with Maribel, how they laughed in daylight cafes, how they dreamed out loud without fear. He remembered the day the truth surfaced, the sickening realization that she had shared her heart elsewhere while still holding his hand. The pain had been sharp and humiliating, cutting deeper because he had trusted completely. Now, kneeling in the sun with sirens approaching in the distance, he understood that pain did not erase love, and love did not excuse betrayal, but both could exist in the same breath. The paramedics arrived quickly, taking over with practiced efficiency, but not before Rowan had given them crucial information, steadying his voice despite the storm inside him. As they lifted Maribel onto the stretcher, her eyes fluttered open briefly, confusion clouding her gaze before recognition sparked. Even without words, the moment landed heavily between them. Rowan stepped back as they loaded her into the ambulance, the sound of sirens slicing through the afternoon, leaving him standing in the plaza with his heart pounding and his past suddenly alive again. He told himself to walk away, to let professionals handle it, to return to the life he had built. But something deeper pulled at him, a quiet conviction that kindness was not weakness, and that being present did not mean reopening old wounds. Rowan followed to the hospital, sitting in the stark waiting room flooded with daylight from wide windows. The hours stretched thin, filled with the hum of machines and distant footsteps. He watched the sun shift across the floor, each inch marking time he could not control. When a nurse finally approached with an update, relief and dread mingled in Rowan's chest. Maribel had suffered a sudden cardiac event linked to an undiagnosed condition, one that might have gone unnoticed until it was too late. The quick response had saved her life. Hearing that, Rowan felt something loosen inside him, a knot he had carried unknowingly since the moment he saw her fall. Saving her had not erased the past, but it had given the present a chance to breathe. In the days that followed, Rowan visited occasionally, always during the daytime when the hospital felt less oppressive. He kept his distance emotionally, offering quiet support without reopening conversations that could unravel them both. Maribel, recovering slowly, carried her own burden of shame and gratitude. She saw in Rowan's calm presence the man she had hurt, and the man he had become, steadier and kinder than before. The reality of how close she had come to dying forced her to confront not just her mortality, but the cost of her choices. Rowan grappled with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to demand explanations, to finally voice the pain he had swallowed for years. Another part recognized that healing did not always require answers, only honesty moving forward. He realized that saving Maribel had also saved something in himself, a belief that he could act with compassion without sacrificing his self-respect. The experience reframed his understanding of strength, showing him that forgiveness could be an internal act, not a transaction. As Maribel regained her strength, she began to rebuild her own life with a newfound humility. The scare stripped away illusions, leaving clarity in their place. She sought therapy, reconnected with values she had neglected, and learned to sit with regret without letting it define her future. Rowan watched from a respectful distance, encouraged by her efforts but careful with his heart. Their interactions were gentle, grounded in mutual acknowledgement of the past and an unspoken agreement not to rush toward anything undefined. One afternoon, sunlight pouring through the hospital atrium, Rowan realized that the story of his life was no longer anchored to betrayal. It was anchored to choice. He had chosen to help when he could have turned away. He had chosen kindness without expectation of reward. That choice echoed outward, influencing how he approached every part of his life afterward. He returned to his work with renewed purpose, designing spaces that invited light and connection, places where people could feel seen and safe. Maribel was eventually discharged, stepping back into the world with a quiet resolve. She and Rowan shared a final moment of acknowledgement, a look that carried gratitude, remorse, and respect without reopening wounds that had finally begun to scar over. They did not promise anything beyond continued healing, and that was enough. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is allowing each other to move forward honestly. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you that compassion can exist alongside pain, please take a moment to like, share, and engage with this video so its message can reach someone who needs it today. Just before the ending, we have a special request to comment and share what this story made you feel, because your words might be the kindness someone else is searching for. As Rowan walked back into the bright afternoon, the city alive around him, he felt lighter than he had in years. The sun warmed his face, and for the first time since the past resurfaced, he smiled without reservation. He understood now that being broken once did not disqualify him from being a lifeline. In saving Maribel's life, he had reclaimed a part of himself he thought was lost forever, proving that even in daylight, when everything is visible, grace can still find its way in.